Hey, welcome to conversation number 4 from our teaching series, Growing Up Good. During this series, what we're seeking to do is answer some of the big questions about what it means to grow up. From a child to a teenager to an adult, what does it mean to grow up good? And as we talk about this, I want you to be thinking about your own personal criteria. What would you call a good adult? Are they responsible? Are they successful? Maybe are they nice? See, because what we're wanting to do over these conversations is talk about 5 virtues, 5 values, character traits of someone that is extolled both in our society and in the Bible as being a mature person, having grown up good. The first 3 conversations, they were about trust, humility, and mercy. Next time, we're going to talk about excellence, and today we're going to talk about generosity, having a heart of generosity. And so no matter where you're coming from, today, what we get to talk about, right now what we get to talk about is how, no matter age you're at, how we can grow up a little bit, how we can mature. And there is a special focus on parents and parenting and raising kids well, but really this is for all of us, because growing up good is the realization that it never stops. Every day is an opportunity to expand and develop and grow. The core text for our teaching series comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11, which says, when I was a child, I spoke and I thought and I reasoned as a child, but when I grew up, I put away childish things. Now, I don't know what it's like in your house, but I can tell how everyone is doing based on how generous they're feeling. Like if I come in from work and I can kind of see how my kids are interacting, like if they're sharing well, and if they're like, yeah, sure, you can use my favorite toy, and maybe you can play on the Switch next, or you can have the iPad, then I know like things are going pretty good, like they're in a good place. But if I come into screaming matches, like it's mine, and it's my toy, or it's my turn, and it's my opportunity to watch a show, then I just know that it's maybe not been a good day, and I'm just going to walk in and ask my wife if she'd like to leave the house for a few minutes. You know, that's the way that I come into the house, is expecting maybe just a bit of a rescue mission. But when it comes to my kids, sometimes they need to be reminded. They need to be reminded why we're generous with things, why we share things. And what I usually tend to boil it down to is that it's not theirs to begin with. Especially in my house, where pretty much everything has been bought and paid for by us or by relatives, it's not really their stuff. But I'm going to share with you now a parenting technique. And I'm not going to say this is ever going to be featured in a book or an article, because it's probably really, really wrong, but this is how I parent my children. That when they're doing something, I'll tend to kind of snap a little bit and be like, threaten to take away the very thing that they're messing with. So for example, my kids, they're not the softest on the doors. Like they like a good old slamming session, not even when they're angry. And I have been known in the past to threaten to remove all the doors in the house and burn them in the backyard. Not one of my best moments. Also, when I find that there's bowls all over the kitchen table on a morning, I'm like, okay, no more bowls. We'll never have any bowls anymore. And I think maybe the one that I was least able to ever understand how I would follow this one up was when in the basement, my kids were using the light switch like a strobe to have a little party down there. And I just said, that's it, this afternoon, I'm taking all the light switches out in the house. Obviously I didn't, because I don't even know how you would do that. But sometimes I'd like to try and remind my kids that the things that they use or make use of, they're not really theirs. And so to be able to understand like why we share things or why we treat things well is having this virtue and this value of generosity. To knowing that not everything belongs to me and not everything is to be used by me or even just for my good. Like it's not difficult for you and I to agree that it's immature to just declare that everything is for you, that you're the center of the universe and that it's mine. Like we don't like that when we see that in other people. We didn't like it when we saw it on the playground, and we don't like it when we see it in the workplace. It's why Ebenezer Scrooge is kind of the caricature, the biggest picture of being a bad person, because in A Christmas Carol, he is miserly. Everything is about him and what he can hold on to. And so if it's immature and it's childish to hold on to things, then we would say that it's maybe mature to know when to share. It's mature to know when and how to be generous. And not only is it mature, it is actually a sign of a healthy human being. There is such a thing known as hoarding disorder. And hoarding disorder, if you go to Mayo Clinic and you go on their website and you search this up, you will find that this is kind of like the pinnacle. This is the apex, the anti-generosity problem. When you have to hold on to things to be okay, to have an attachment to stuff and to things or even to money, because if you don't have that, you just can't feel all right. And this hoarding disorder, when we think about it, oftentimes we think about like a TV show where it's just made ridiculous. It's actually like a low-key growing issue in our culture, especially in the West, especially in America. A growing issue of needing to hold on to things because if we let them go, we feel like we won't be safe. Now, hoarding disorder is actually being attributed to sometimes a childhood trauma, teenage trauma, like formative years, or a key relationship in someone's life was removed from them and safety went with it. And so they hold on to things to feel safe. Now, that's the extreme. Hoarding disorder is the extreme, but it's really like an iceberg. Like, that's what we see. What's underneath the waves are the other behaviors that you and I can share in that don't get looked down on or mocked or criticized or called a disorder in society, but still can be a sign that something's up. Like if you've got a boat that you have to keep paying payments on no matter how much it cripples you just because you have to own a boat, or maybe you work a ridiculous amount. Maybe you overwork. Maybe you're workaholism. Maybe you've got 3 jobs because you just need more and more and more stuff. Or maybe there are things, and a lot of things, you just know you're going to keep forever and no one else is going to get to have it. I want us to take that mentality that if I was to get rid of things or to be generous and give them away, that I would somehow be losing out. I want us to take that and I want us to put that against something that Jesus Christ said. Maybe one of the clearest, one of the most profound things when it comes to understanding possessions and stuff. Because what Jesus once said is that it is more blessed to give than to receive. It is more blessed to give than to receive. That means, Jesus means, what he said in Acts was, if you're willing to, you can actually give stuff away and your life will be more blessed for it. So here's the challenge. The challenge you and I have is to see giving stuff away as not just healthy, not just good, not just mature, but it's actually God's way of doing things. That having or even receiving is not as good as giving. And that if all we ever do is have and receive and earn and hold on to, it's not just a sign of maybe being unhealthy, but that can actually be a deeper spiritual, a soul deep issue. I want us to look at what I'm going to call a spiritual diagnosis of a hoarding issue. This spiritual diagnosis, because Jesus in the early days of the church, he shares with the church who they're going to be. He says, look, you're going to be people who share. You're going to be generous. You're going to sell what you don't need, anything extra, and you're going to give it to those who don't have. You're going to take care of one another. And the early church was really starting to get this, and they were doing like these amazing things of generosity and sharing, and almost everyone was getting it. But as we see in Acts 5, there was a guy called Ananias. And Ananias, with his wife, Sapphira, sold some property. And when they sold this property, they brought part of the money to the apostles, claiming it was the full amount. Now, with his wife's consent, he kept the rest. Then Peter said, Ananias, why have you let Satan fill your heart? He says, look, the property was yours. The property was yours to do with whatever you want, to sell or to not to sell, as you wished. And after selling it, the money was to do with whatever you wanted. It was yours to give away. How could you do a thing like this? You weren't lying to us, but to God. This is the warning. This is the danger that can be had when our hearts are too connected to stuff, that our hearts can actually be commandeered. They can be taken. What Peter is diagnosing in Ananias is a heart decay that Satan has been able to take over his entire heart so that he would even lie to God about how much money he desires to give. See, what we're wrestling with today when we talk about generosity is not just a virtue, it's not just a value, it's about what's in here and who's in here. What is most important? What do we value? And is it actually good? So the Bible gives us this in Ananias and Sapphira. He gives us this. This is how to do it wrong. This is how do you know something is desperately wrong when you need to lie about it. But what does it mean to get it right? What does it mean for someone to not have heart decay when it comes to possessions and to be able to actually live righteously and well and to grow up good? Well, the Bible doesn't pull back on giving us an example. It gives us something that we can point to and look to, something we can actually practically follow. The example, it comes from a guy called Paul. Now, Paul is featured all throughout the New Testament, almost the most featured in the New Testament, second only to Jesus. And Paul's a bit of a workhorse. He really is. Like, he works and he makes tents during the day and he's preaching Jesus in the night. He travels throughout the known world as a missionary, preaching. And he's a Christian who has to understand and get to know what it means to be a Christian and understand money. To be someone who depends on others' generosity while also supplying for other people. And so we see Paul's example. We find this in Acts chapter 20. And this is what Paul has to say. He says, I have never coveted anyone's silver or gold or fine clothing. You know that these hands of mine have worked to supply my own needs and also even the needs of those who were with me. He says, I have been a constant example of how you can help those in need by working hard. You should remember the words of the Lord Jesus, and this is where it comes from. It is more blessed to give than to receive. Really, there's three things that Paul lays down here. Three life goals, if you will, or three personal commandments that he holds tight to make sure that we can grow up good when we understand generosity and money. We can make sure that we're not growing up in danger, that our kids aren't growing up with disorders, and that we're not being eaten up by possessions. The first thing that Paul says is that I have never coveted. I have never coveted, which means I have never lived in envy of other people's things. Now, this is Paul's own personal commandment, but you might have heard it before. It's a bit more of a global commandment for those who say they love God and love people. It's something God said in the very beginning when he first called the community together. He made it one of the big 10 commandments. Basically saying, don't spend your life trying to chase the Joneses, keeping up with other people who have other things. You have what you have. To be able to be content with that and to not covet other people's gold, their silver, fine clothing, that means you will use your money wisely. Because if we're honest, a lot of us waste money that could actually be used to introduce people to Jesus. Like, we say we love God and we love people. We say that we're here to embrace outsiders into the family. We say we're here for the Great Commission to make disciples of Jesus. Yet, coveting other people and what they have, it creeps in and it causes us to waste the resources we do have, chasing the wind. And it's money that could actually change someone's destiny. It could change their eternity. The second thing, this second personal real commandment goal Paul has is to supply for the needs of others. And when we talk about supplying for the needs of others, there's really two avenues to this. The first is to supply those who are with you, as in your family. Like, if you're a family, you're the responsible adult and you have dependents, then it is part of your job to supply for them, to work hard as you can. Now, I'm never going to be against government assistance. I'm never going to be against depending on the church to help you or parents being able to pay for your things. I'm not. My wife and I, Jackie, we started off dirt poor, living in a rental house. I was working on a farm. She was working in a group home. We didn't have a lot of stuff. And so we used WIC foods to be able to feed our kids. And we let people pay for things. And that's okay. But it's not okay to stay there. It's not okay to say that's where you're going to live forever. You're going to completely rely on others to supply for you. If you have the ability, if you have the capacity, we should work hard to supply for those who we choose to take responsibility for. And the second avenue, from providing those who are with you, like your family, like your immediate dependents, is also providing those who are with you in ministry. Paul talks about providing for those who are with him. Those who were with him were not his family, not married, no kids. There were those who were alongside him doing ministry, preaching about Jesus, sharing the good news of the kingdom. And he talks then extensively throughout the New Testament about how money should be given. It should be given to churches so that they can pay people to focus on prayer and on preaching the gospel. That's what they should be able to be focused on. And so that they get compensation. They get some money to be able to eat and to shelter and to clothe themselves so that they can do that. See, every ministry that ever happens at Epiphany Station happens because people choose to supply for the needs of those who are with them in ministry. From single moms who can do $5 a week to other people who can cover entire chunks of the budget. All of it is because people see that they are with people in ministry. And we as Epiphany Station see that there are so many people who are with us in ministry and therefore supply for the needs of the ministry. The key for us is to understand who we want to be alongside. Who are we really with? Whose mission and whose vision? Where do we want to see the kingdom built? Then we will work hard not only to supply what we need, but to supply for the needs of ministry, to supply for the needs of those who we say we stand with. The third example that Paul gives, the third example of his personal commandments, is to be an example to others. Like he says he works hard and he supplies so he can actually be an example. And that means you and I, when it comes to money, we have to be willing to talk about it. You cannot be an example if it's completely secretive. We have to be able to talk about money, to show hard work and supplying for the needs of ministry and for others. It means we don't get to hide from these conversations. And parents, we should talk to our kids about money, because when it comes to giving and generosity, look, you can give as much as you want and you can actually be a benchmark. How happy would you be if your entire church gave how much you can give? We can't all give the same, but we can all give chunks of our money, percentages of it. What would your church look like if you were what everyone else followed? It doesn't matter the amount. Jesus talks about a woman, a widow, who gave 100% of what she had. You see, and there are people, families, who can give 10% of what they have. And there are retired couples who can give 30% of what they have. And there are students who can give 5% of what they have. The key is being an example of generosity. It's not how much. It's about the heart of why you are doing it. And being able to tell people why you are generous, why you believe in giving things away. And so parents, we must be willing to talk to our kids, because it's so very easy when it comes to finances and money to miss this piece of generosity and wonder why it's not working. Wonder why we're not blessed with finances. Wonder why the salary doesn't go up. Wonder why the expenses keep coming in. See, God has established it from the very beginning that when it comes to his people, the church has always been a place to be given towards, to teach us something about generosity. God has always wanted to remind all people that the stuff that they have is not actually theirs. It's something given to them on loan. And then when it comes to giving, they're challenged to see that and to act on that by giving it away freely. Something that we see as a marker of maturity, something we see in 1 Corinthians, is this understanding of where stuff comes from. What it says is this: what do you have that God hasn't given you? And if everything you have is from God, why boast as though we're not a gift? If we believe that God has given us, and we believe in loving God and loving people, then really nothing is ours to hold on to. We use it however God teaches us and shows us to use it. And so you have these three things from Paul, these examples of understanding generosity, of how to grow up. And that is where the challenge comes. Are we willing to grow up a little bit? Are we willing to be more giving and more generous than ever before? Here's my challenge for you this week. My challenge for you this week is to find a way to be more generous than you've ever been. Now, this might mean going out and find a place where you could do some work for someone and refuse to be paid. Like you can go rake yards, cut grass, clean gutters, and do it for free, supplying for the needs of someone who maybe can't do it for themselves. Maybe if you own your own business, you could forgive a bill. You could reduce a bill and let them know why you're doing that. Maybe for those of you who have, you could do something to give a gift. You could take a list of those things you said you would never give away, that they're too valuable, and just give it away. You could sign something over. You could hand it over out of a heart of generosity, seeing other people be blessed, because it's more blessed to give than to receive. Or maybe you could have the conversation in your home and with God about giving to the church, about giving to your home church, no matter where that is, and taking whatever you can give right now and increasing that offering. See, Jackie and I, when we first started out, we were giving as little as 1% of our entire income because we were terrified. What God has led us to do then is to add a couple of percent every single year since we started. What I have come to appreciate about money, and what God tries to teach us, what Paul shows us example of, is when we hold on to things, it can become incredibly unhealthy. The best thing that can happen to money is for it to be put to good use. Money is healthiest when it doesn't stay in my pocket longest. We should remember the words of Jesus when we think about money and finances, when we think about generosity, that it is more blessed to give than to receive. As we wrap up this conversation, I know it can be a sensitive one when we talk about money. If you want to talk to anyone here at Epiphany, or you want to talk to a member of staff or a pastor, you can text us at 94090. Text the word Epiphany to us, and we would love to talk to you and communicate our beliefs and our biblical standing on money and finances and generosity. And maybe you want help with that, making some changes, knowing how to budget, or knowing what you're going to do to make your money actually build the kingdom, be useful to the kingdom. As we wrap things up here, let me pray for all of us. God, as we talk about money, I ask that you would help us appreciate that it's a delicate, it can be a sensitive topic, but that's because it's important. And we worry about it because it's important, and it makes us lose sleep because it's important. And so help us to understand how you have designated in your economy how money works. That we would understand that giving is the best thing that we can do. It is good for our heart, it is good for our soul, it is good for our finances to be free with money, to be willing to give, to supply for the needs of others. Help us to be an example to each other and to establish the church as the most generous family, the most generous group of people in the world. We ask you to help us be this and do this in Jesus' name. Amen.